Imagine this. You are standing in a room full of people, a party, a meeting, a family gathering. You are speaking. Your voice is clear. Your point is valid. Your experience is a hard-won currency. But you watch as a man's eyes drift over your shoulder to find someone younger. You watch as your words are gently, politely dismissed, only to be echoed seconds later by a man and met as a revelation. You feel the strange, cold sensation of becoming a piece of furniture in your own life, present, solid, and utterly unnoticed. This is the haunting paradox of the woman over 40. She has never been more powerful, more competent, or more self-aware, yet she finds herself disappearing in plain sight. Society tells her she is entering her prime, yet the gaze of the world, the one that once validated her existence, moves on to a younger model. The very qualities that built families, companies, and communities become invisible when they are no longer packaged in youth. But here lies the deeper, more unsettling question that title forces us to confront. Is this invisibility merely a social slight, a cruelty of a youth-obsessed culture? Or is it something far more profound? Is the feeling of vanishing a wound inflicted from the outside? Or is it the terrifying symptom of a woman finally shedding a skin she never realized she was wearing? What if the agony of being unseen is actually the birth pang of finally seeing yourself for the first time? The title doesn't just describe a problem. It holds up a mirror to a psychological trap. And the key to unlocking that trap lies not in fighting for visibility, but in understanding why you were trained to need it in the first place. If this tension resonates with something you've felt but never named, hit subscribe, because we're only beginning to uncover what lies beneath the surface of invisibility. The root cause of this vanishing act, as psychologists and social philosophers have come to diagnose it, is not simply ageism, though that is the visible symptom. The hidden problem is what renowned psychoanalyst and Jungian thinker Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes identified as the severing of a woman from her deep life. From birth, a woman is conditioned to derive her sense of existence from the external gaze. First her parents, then peers, then partners, and finally, a culture that values her for what French philosopher Simone de Beauvoir called her situation rather than her substance. She is trained to be the object of perception, not the subject of her own story. Her visibility has always been a form of currency, traded for safety, love, or status. But the insidious truth the title exposes is this: a woman's identity, built on the unstable foundation of external validation, is destined for collapse the moment that validation is withdrawn. This creates a fundamental flaw in the architecture of the self. By 40, a woman has often spent decades performing a version of herself designed to be seen, to be pleasing, to be useful. But when the cultural gaze shifts to younger women, it doesn't just feel like rejection. It triggers a psychological identity crisis. The self she constructed, the one that lived in the mirror of others, begins to dissolve. She feels invisible because the part of her that was visible was never truly her own. She is left standing in the wreckage of a persona, wondering where she went. The unspoken tragedy is that she was trained to look outward for a reflection of her worth. And now, when she needs that reflection most, the mirror has gone dark. But what if that broken mirror was actually a locked door? The consequences of this silent erasure are not merely personal. They ripple outward, shaping the very architecture of our relationships, our workplaces, and our collective psyche. When a woman learns, over decades, that her value is tethered to a fleeting cultural currency, she begins to preemptively abandon herself before the world even gets the chance. She diminishes her own voice in meetings, convinced her perspective belongs to a generation no longer relevant. She settles for stale marriages, mistaking the absence of conflict for the presence of love, because she fears the solitude of starting over would only amplify her invisibility. She pours her remaining visibility into her children, her aging parents, her community, becoming a caretaker for everyone's existence except her home. The tragedy, as author Marianne Williamson once articulated, is that our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate, but that we are powerful beyond measure. Yet for the woman over 40, the fear becomes inverted. She begins to fear that she was never powerful at all, that her influence was merely borrowed from youth. This internalized invisibility becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. She stops applying for promotions, stops starting the business, stops wearing the dress that feels too bold. She learns to apologize for taking up space, and in doing so, she inadvertently confirms society's quiet assumption that she is indeed fading. The stakes could not be higher, because when an entire demographic of women who hold the wisdom of experience, the clarity of hard-earned lessons, and the fierce protectiveness of those who have loved deeply, chooses to shrink, we all lose. We lose the matriarchal voice that balances ambition with ethics. We lose the innovators who have stopped pitching their ideas. We lose the mothers who could have reshaped the very narrative their daughters inherit. The silence of the invisible woman is not a peaceful retirement. It is a slow, quiet erasure of half the world's wisdom. And the title suggests there is a way to stop it, but the solution will demand something radical. She must stop trying to be seen and start reclaiming the one thing she was never taught to own, the authority to define herself. If this truth struck something in you, drop a comment with your own experience below. Hit like to join the conversation and subscribe, because reclaiming what was lost starts with refusing to stay silent. The solution, as illuminated by the deepest currents of psychological wisdom, is not to fight for visibility within the old framework. It is to dismantle the framework entirely. The psychologist's prescription is a radical act of what Carl Jung called individuation, the process of becoming the unique self you were always meant to be, separate from the roles, projections, and expectations of the collective. This requires a fundamental mindset shift from seeking the gaze to wielding the gaze. Instead of asking, "Do you see me?" the woman over 40 must learn to ask, "What do I see?" She must stop performing for an audience that has already left and begin directing her own play. This is where the counterintuitive strategy emerges. Embrace the invisibility, not as a defeat, but as a liberation. Think of it as a master spy, finally being allowed to shed their disguise. For decades, she wore the costume of the ingenue, the nurturer, the agreeable one. But invisibility, the title suggests, is the ultimate camouflage. When the world stops watching, she is finally free to move without permission. She can speak without the need for applause. She can build without the fear of vandalism. She can become dangerous, in the most magnificent sense of the word, because she is no longer asking for approval to exist. Consider the metaphor of the forest. The sapling bends for the sun, desperate for light, easily broken by the wind. But the ancient oak, rooted deep, does not beg for attention. Its strength is not in being noticed, but in being unshakable. The prescription is to stop growing for the light and start growing toward depth, to cultivate what cannot be seen but can be felt. Wisdom, sovereignty, unapologetic self-authority. The title's secret is that a woman who stops needing to be visible becomes, for the first time, truly invincible. But this transformation requires one final, irreversible step, a total reclamation of the self she abandoned decades ago. The ultimate revelation the title offers is this: you were never meant to be a reflection. You were meant to be the source. The feeling of invisibility after 40 is not the end of your story. It is the severing of a thread that was never yours to begin with. For decades, you lived in a hall of mirrors constructed by culture, family, and expectation, learning to measure your existence by the reflections bouncing back at you. And now, when those mirrors have gone dark, you stand in the void and mistake silence for absence. But what if that darkness is not emptiness? What if it is the vast, uncharted interior of your own being, the one you abandoned long ago when you first learned to perform for the world's approval? The paradigm shift the author intends is profound. Visibility is not the same as validity. To be seen is to exist in relation to others. To be is to exist in relation to yourself. The woman who reclaims her invisibility stops asking, "Am I still desirable?" and starts asking, "What do I desire?" She stops wondering, "Does my voice matter?" and declares, "My voice is." She moves from being the object of observation to the subject of her own life, and in that shift, she becomes more present, more powerful, and more real than she ever was when the world was watching. This is the author's final truth. The agony of disappearing was actually the invitation to appear, to yourself, for yourself, as yourself. The woman over 40 is not fading. She is coming into focus for the first time. She is the ancient oak whose roots run deeper than any gaze can reach. She is the night sky, vast, sovereign, and luminous in her own darkness. And when she finally stops asking to be seen, she discovers she was never invisible at all. She was just no longer willing to exist in the small, shallow light others cast. She has become her own sun. And that light, genuine, self-authored, and unapologetic, does not need anyone's permission to shine.